Good morning and welcome to another edition of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. This morning, we debate, do all criminal convictions need to result in time behind bars? Next month, a judge in Chicago has set a date for a hearing following the conviction of actor Jussie Smollett, who was convicted of staging a racist and homophobic attack against himself. Smollett faces up to 3 years in prison. But should he go to jail? Should he pay a fine? Should he serve probation? Should other victimless offenses be punished by imprisonment? We'll talk about this morning on Let It Be Known. But first, of course, we go to our news headlines of the morning. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot and city leaders are calling this the largest investment in affordable housing in the city's history. Chicago will invest $1 billion into the creation and preservation of 24 development projects as a result of federal pandemic recovery money in the mayor's 2022 budget. The move not only aims to bring more affordable housing to the city, but also looks to support developments led by people of color. Abraham Lacey, president and CEO of the Far South Community Development Corporation, which is leading the project, said this project is transformative. It's catalytic. Lacey says, we believe that this is going to be a game changer for the Far South Side area, and it's going to address the current housing need. The new Morgan Park Commons would consist of 390 units total, 250 of which will be both affordable and mixed income housing. Lacey says the low income housing tax credit will help with phase one of the project, which is building 80 units adjacent to South Halsted Street. Leon Walker, co-founder of the Chicago Emergency Minority Developer Initiative, an organization that seeks to get more developers of color in the industry, said it really is a part of saying how can we stand up entrepreneurs of color in the neighborhood such that they now can participate in the revitalization of their own communities. We have been saying and demanding, asking, pleading for someone to come build something in our community, to do something new in our neighborhoods. Well, now this begins the process of building capacity with the talent that already exists in the community, such that they can begin to execute their vision and help revitalize their own communities. So Mayor Lightfoot doing some big things in Chicago. Also in the news, well, before we get to the news topic, our next news topic, let's bring on the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis Jr. Dr. Chavis, good morning.
Good morning, Stacey Brown. From Washington, D.C., we're very pleased to be on this Monday morning edition of Let It Be Known. On behalf of Karen Carter Richards, our distinguished chair of the NNPA, representing 230 African-American owned newspapers and media companies across America, we greet everybody on this Monday morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Chavis also in the news this morning. Dr. Chavis, remember when Crystal Mason, a black woman in Texas, was sentenced not long ago to 5 years in prison for voting because she didn't know she couldn't vote based on the terms of a previous probation agreement? Well, how about this? 2 registered Republicans living in Florida, sprawling the village's retirement community, have been separately charged with voting twice in the 2020 presidential election, according to court records. The defendants, Joan Halstead, who is 72 years old, and Jay Ketchik, 63, both white, have each been charged with a felony fraud count, according to court records. Halstead and Ketchik were freed from custody after posting $2,000 bond. Halstead and Ketchik also, they are registered Republicans and who participated in that Stop the Steal rally in their states. Investigators allege that they voted in person. Halstead voted in person in Florida in October of 2020 and also cast a second ballot in New York using absentee ballots. Halstead bought her home in the Villages in April of 2020 for $250,000. At the time of the purchase, Halstead listed her address as a resident in Rochester, New York. Halstead sold the New York property after buying the Florida home. As far as Ketchik is concerned, he's been charged with voting by mail in Florida in October 2020 and casting a second ballot in Michigan using the absentee ballot. So, you know, what's good for the goose, right, Dr. Chavis, should be good for the gander.
Well, again, it shows you the racial disparity, the racial discrimination, and how one race is treated one way, another race is treated another way. Another exposure of people trying to subvert the election, the same people who stormed the Capitol on January the 6th.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Chavis, 50 years after the fight of the century, Nico Ali Walsh entered the same ring where his grandfather, the great Muhammad Ali, fought Smoking Joe Frazier in one of the greatest boxing matches ever. It is also the scene of some of Muhammad Ali's greatest moments. And just like his grandfather, the young Ali exited the Madison Square Garden ring a winner. The 21-year-old son of Rashida Ali defeated Reyes Sanchez to improve to 3-0 on his young pro career. It was the first time one of his fights went the distance, coming out on top via a majority decision. It marked the first loss of Sanchez's career, who entered the night 6-0. Nico Ali says it was an honor to fight here. He says, I'm just looking to build off every single fight. I'm looking to learn and improve every single fight. I've already reached the pinnacle having fought here at Madison Square Garden. Congratulations to the young man and carrying on the great legacy of his grandfather, the greatest Muhammad Ali.
Absolutely. We congratulate the Ali family, and we see that the legacy of Muhammad Ali is still alive.
Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations to the Ali family is correct. Dr. Chavis, Jussie Smollett, the actor convicted on Thursday of falsely reporting he was the victim of a racist and homophobic attack, has turned to whether the debate has turned to whether he will receive prison time when he is sentenced in several weeks. The special prosecutor said he hasn't decided on what recommendation he'll make to the judge, but emphasized how serious the charges were against Smollett. But isn't that the case always when it comes to people of color, particularly African Americans? And does all offenses, all convictions warrant prison? Let's bring on our special guest this morning. Let it be known's chief legal analyst, Robert Tarver of the Tarver Law Firm in New Jersey, Patrice Sullivan from the DC Justice Lab, and journalist James Wright. Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So let's start with Robert Tarver, Attorney Tarver. Does this offense, first let's start with Jussie Smollett. Does this offense, this conviction, does it warrant prison time?
Well, certainly this is a very, very serious offense. And no one sitting here or listening to your audience should in any way belittle the idea of the really bad thing that he did and the really stupid thing that he did. But the fact of the matter is, these are what are called disorderly persons offenses. And as I understand it, in that jurisdiction, most of the people who are convicted of these types of crimes do not do significant jail time. It's my understanding that there are some cases where they have done less than a year or perhaps something leading up to that. But the fact of the matter is, this is serious. He's already lost a lot. He's lost his career. He's never going to work again in the film industry. And so that's something that a judge will have to consider as well.
And from the DC Justice Lab, I want to go over to Patrice Sullivan. We've seen, as Attorney Tarver said, stupid cases, right? Where defendants have done stupid things. But again, I guess the overall overarching question is, does all offenses, despite it being felonies, do they deserve prison time?
They certainly don't. I mean, we have really, really watered down what amounts to a harm serious enough to put a human being in a cage. And we've started defaulting to imprisonment for people who we're mad at, right? People who have done things that are stupid, people who have done things that are embarrassing, people who have done things that, in this case, I think set a movement back a great deal. And we should be thinking about dangerousness. We should be thinking about who we're afraid will engage in really dangerous and serious consequences in the future, as opposed to just who are we angry with in the moment. We wouldn't treat a child this way just because we were mad at them, and we shouldn't be doing that in the adult system either.
Yeah, and Dr. Chavis, for what we learned this morning, for full disclosure, Patrice Sullivan is a relative of the Black press. Deanna Tisdale Johnson is her cousin of the Jackson Advocate. So It's always great to see that this morning.
Absolutely. Great family tradition, the Jackson Advocate.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so as we continue the discussion, James, I want to go to you because I know you've covered the DC jails and pre-show we talked about some of the things that are going on there. But when you look at this case, James, and we're going to segue from Jussie Smollett because this is not just about Jussie. He's just a springboard for this conversation. But when you look at that, James, I know there's some comparisons you can make.
Well, the interesting thing about the Smollett case is that he's a famous movie star, and those folks tend to get off because they're famous. Now, you're right, Stacey. He's probably not going to work, at least if ever, for a long time. I think the important thing is that in terms of your central question is that we have to look at the facilities. You talk about DC jail. DC jail is really kind of full. And a lot of these prisons, as well as jails throughout the country, are full. So if we want to put Jussie Smollett in prison, it's just another inmate going to a full facility. And do we really need that? And of course, I need not say he will be part of the overwhelming majority in the state of Illinois of Black people imprisoned, should he go to prison for that. And that is a problem in Illinois, and it is certainly a problem here in the District of Columbia.
Well, let's turn to even what should be a much bigger case, what should be a case where you would think some serious jail time would come out of, and that is the insurrection, the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol. Right. So far now, we know that we haven't gotten the most serious offenders yet in front of a judge or at least on trial, but of the 50, and I'm reading here, of the 50 plus defendants who have been sentenced for their role in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, fewer than half were sent to jail, and most received an assortment of lesser penalties, including brief terms of house arrest, a couple of years of probation, 4-figure fines, or court-ordered community service. Patrice, I know you had a thought on that. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so these cases have been handled differently, not just with respect to sentencing, but from the start to finish, right? We had people in our city who everyone knew to be armed. The police knew where their cars were, the police knew where their hotels were, and they didn't see any urgent need to get search warrants and go through their things. They didn't see any urgent need to arrest people before they went home in some cases, as far as the West Coast of the country before making an arrest. But for Black people who live in Washington, D.C., the law comes down with a very, very heavy hand. And it is worth underscoring how unusual it is to see any white people in our system here. We have a juvenile justice system that is entirely Black children, and our adult system is over 90% Black. 94% of the people sentenced for felonies in the District of Columbia last year were Black. And so it's really unusual to see any prosecution, any policing of white people in the city, but the way they've been treated from start to finish has looked very different than what we see day to day here.
Yeah, and talk about, James, I know you had some thoughts on that and you've covered DC jails. I'm going to go back to you before I go to Attorney Tarver, but the treatment of these insurrectionists in DC jails, we know that at least one of them complained about the food, and they were accommodated by being transferred.
Yes. And let me just say that the one who complained about the food, one of the insurrectionists, as you just alluded to, was quickly serviced. You have some African Americans in the DC jail who should have strict diets, whether it be based on their religion or just their desire for personal health, but they're not accommodated to. I'll just put it to you straight, sort of the way Patrice put things. Black people are treated like crap here when it comes to the criminal justice system. And this is really interesting because this used to be Chocolate City, but this is no longer Chocolate City. This is somebody else's city. So we have to keep in mind that that this struggle continues. And the DC jail is just one component of the overall struggle in the criminal justice system. But I have to tell you that DC needs a new jail. That's just what it is. They just need a new jail.
Well, Attorney Tarver, I want to get back to this. The insurrectionists, they're not, so far, they're not receiving any type of significant penalties for their actions. And we're talking about the capital of the U.S. We're talking some of them being armed, as has been alluded to. What are we seeing here? What message are we sending here?
I don't want to defend the system at all, because I think there are incredible disparities. But with regard to this situation that happened in D.C., this is a situation that realistically overwhelmed that system. And I've spoken to a number of the prosecutors down there. They didn't expect for anything of this large magnitude to happen. And so you kind of have to weed out who's going to be charged and who's not going to be charged, what they're going to be charged with and what they're not going to be charged with. But I wish I could say that this problem belonged to Washington, D.C., because it doesn't. I was down sentencing a defendant down in the federal courts in Florida. And, she ended up getting a 6-month sentence for a minor fraud type incident. And she turned to me and she said, how is it that I'm getting this type of thing when people who stormed the Capitol, tried to take over the government, put everyone at risk in the entire country, if you're going to talk about risk, and they're out there with maybe a 1 month, 30-day, 40-day sentence and something of that nature. We have a racial disparity problem, but beyond that, we are now stretching it to a ideological disparity problem, whereas people who are right-wing oriented are getting a better form of treatment. And that's what you were talking about when you talked about what he called himself, the QAnon shaman, the guy with the horns, who ended up getting a special diet due to his shaman religion. Come on now, come on. If you or I or any other person of color had dared to appear before someone and said that we were a shaman or some other outlandish religion and we want a different diet or a different segregation or a different treatment, we probably not only would have been laughed out, we probably would have had our butt kicked just for approaching on that. And that's the realistic thing. And I'll tell you that from my 35 years of practice in both the federal and the state system, we as people of color are not getting anywhere near a fair shake when it comes to the administration of justice.
Well, and I want to bring Dr. Chavis into the conversation too, because Dr. Chavis obviously has experienced prison and disparities and unjustly imprisoned for almost a decade. Dr. Chavis, your insights on what we're discussing this morning.
Well, there are two ways, and both ways have to be done almost simultaneously. We have to change the system structurally, but we also have to change the people in the system, the people who operate the system. We need more African-American prosecutors. We need more African-American judges. We need more African-American running the jails. And as James said, who construct jails that are humanely constructed and inmates are treated like human beings rather than property of the state. I encourage everybody to look at the Charlotte Mecklenburg jail, where there's an African-American sheriff, and where when he comes to the jail, the inmates applaud him, give him a standing ovation, because they're treated with respect and human dignity, even though they've been convicted of something and sentenced. So I think the racial disparity, the ideological disparity, it's white supremacy, it's systemic racism, and we have to almost have an all hands on deck attitude toward criminal justice reform. But understand, criminal justice reform is just not one, just the police alone. It is the whole system of justice, of judicial reform that needs to be done, as Attorney has alluded to.
Well, for our two attorneys on the panel, our distinguished attorneys, Tarver and Patrice Sullivan, got a question. We're talking about the January 6th insurrection. This was people acting in concert, right? We hear about the RICO statute all the time. It's particularly when it comes to drug cases, particularly when it involves African Americans. Heck, even R. Kelly got charged under the RICO statute. And what's important about the RICO statute is, and you guys know this far better than I know it as attorneys, but that tax on in 20 years, I believe, an automatic sentence of 20 years just alone with the RICO statute. Why haven't the RICO statute been used when it comes to the insurrection?
Well, I'll chime in. U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia gets to decide which charges it wants to file, and unlike any state, they get to decide where they want to charge the person, because they're our local prosecutor as well as our federal prosecutor in the District of Columbia until we have statehood. And by way of comparison, when we had people kettled together and rounded up during the inauguration 4 years ago, everyone was charged under a rioting statute and with conspiracy to riot, and with any tangential hook they could use to hold people criminally liable for the conduct of people who were nearby them. And we didn't see that theory of the case used in the January 6th insurrection cases yet. And we haven't heard anyone talk about 10-year penalties for the people charged in these cases. And to go back to the point earlier about, sort of our system being overwhelmed here, I think that too goes back to racism and ideas about dangerousness. Can you imagine if police and prosecutors knew that thousands of Black people were coming here with the kinds of plans they knew the white people had on January 6th? And what would have happened in that case? The system would not have been overwhelmed, right? The airports would have been shut down. The fencing would have been put up in advance, and we would have been treated much, much differently. And there's some misconception about the dangerousness of white people and Black people that leads to, that affects how people are surveilled and how people are prosecuted in this city, and I think nationwide.
Stacey, Patrice makes an incredible point, because all you would need for the racketeering statute is to show that they had a conspiratorial motive. In other words, that at least one or more of them agreed to do something that was illegal and against the federal statute. Well, that's what the whole idea of the insurrection was about, that they believed that they would go above and beyond the lawful actions of the vote in the electoral system to take over the system. They could have been charged under that statute. There are other statutes they could have been charged under, but we see a lot of the minor statutes being charged. And Patrice made an incredible point earlier talking about the riot statute. Why weren't they charged under there? Even if you didn't believe you were going to give them more time, to have a riot charge on your jacket or on your record is much more serious than some of these obstruction charges that a lot of these people are getting.
Well, could it be, Attorney Tarver, Attorney Sulton, that at the top of this conspiracy is none other than Donald Trump? Could it be that that this is totally about avoiding going after Donald Trump?
Well, at the top of this thing actually is Merrick Garland. Quite frankly, he's at the top of the decision making of who's going to be charged, under what circumstance, and how it's going to be charged. So realistically, Trump is just a sideshow at this point.
He was the instigator, though, right, Attorney Tarver? He was the instigator, which makes the case that under RICO, he would have to be charged, right?
Oh, now you're in a whole different zone. You're in a whole different zone now. And quite frankly, some of the things that have happened just recently with the memo that was exposed, with the PowerPoint that was exposed, it makes the prosecution of the president a lot more possible, if not likely, in this scenario.
Patrice Sullivan?
Just to say a little bit more about sort of who's in charge, I think it's important to note that in the District of Columbia, until recently, we had a Black U.S. attorney, we have a Black mayor, we have Black lawmakers, we have Black chief judge, we have a Black police chief, we have a Black person in charge of our Department of Corrections, we have a Black person who's the acting jail warden, and they are responsible for the inhumanity we're seeing toward Black people in this city. And so I think it's really important to understand that Black cops will not save us, and that we have to think really critically about limiting the authority of police and prosecutors and prisons in our justice system overall.
Yeah,
well, that's a powerful statement too. And Dr. Chavis, I'm gonna throw that to you. She says we have to really think about limiting those powers.
Well, again, I think the first thing that DC needs is statehood. I think that, you still have taxation without representation. And if we had statehood, you have different people holding these positions that Patrice just outlined. I think that we need to look at systemic reform. And what I mean by reform, I mean serious reform. Right now, white supremacy is institutionalized in the criminal justice system, from the top to the bottom. And therein lies the problem. And I think that whether or not Trump gets charged, I'm pretty sure that he's going to eventually get charged. But, the system is so intricate, You know, unfortunately, the wheels of justice turn very, very slow, too slow when it comes to Black people, but it turns very fast when it comes to white people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And James, I'm going to give you a final thought from you on this situation. So we started again with Jussie Smollett. Should he see jail time? But more importantly, do all cases require prison time?
Well, let me just say something real quick about Justice Smollett. As Attorney Tarver said, he has very serious charges against him. However, he should be given any consideration that someone such as a John Wayne or a Frank Sinatra would have been given. And you can read into that what I just said. The second thing is that we really, we can't incarcerate everybody, nor should we incarcerate everybody. We should focus more on public health and trying to find out what's going on with these people who are committing these crimes. And instead of locking them up, we should focus on helping them in terms of their lives. We have a program, and Patrice knows about this program, the Building Blocks program.
James, I think James has frozen up on us here. But James channeling his inner Public Enemy, talking about John Wayne and and Frank Sinatra. But Attorney Talver, you know, again, we've discussed this morning. It's one of those topics where we certainly needed more time, but I want to give you your closing thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, James could not have said it better, but let me just amplify one thing that was said by Patrice and also Dr. Chavis. There was a time when we in this country could believe with relative certainty that putting a Black judge or a Black police chief or a Black head of the jail would result in a better outcome, because we believed that those people came to the situation with a certain sensitivity. That's no longer the case, because there are people of color that are more restrictive, more right-leaning, and more unfair than many of the other communities, in much the same as the overseer fashion. So we have to be very careful about the people that we do put into these positions. We need to put them in, but we need to know that they have the right bend, whether they're Black, white, Hispanic, or otherwise.
Well, absolutely. And from the DC Justice Lab, Attorney Patrice Sulton, we want your closing thoughts on this as well.
Thank you. I think the biggest takeaway that I want people to have about this entire situation is an understanding that our laws are entirely man-made, right? They're entirely made up. And not only should we be thinking about whether a conviction warrants prison time, we should be really thoughtful about whether every single incident of misconduct warrants the condemnation of a criminal conviction at all. Right? Just because something overlaps with the law that we made up doesn't necessarily mean that we need to pull people into the system. And we see that in DC all the time. That's the only way you get a criminal justice system that's entirely Black, is you've decided to use it in certain situations and not use it in others. And so we should be really thoughtful about when we use it at all.
Well, we appreciate that, Patrice. And of course, we give the boss his closing arguments. Dr. Chavis?
Well, I want to thank each of our panelists, Attorney Talver, Attorney Patrice. I think everything you said is very accurate, as well as our dear beloved brother who comes on, Brother James. I think, Stacy, that this is a matter that we have to pursue more. These disparities that have been outlined and highlighted are very serious. To me, the racism is more serious than the charges. And I think that's what we have to get at the heart of. And I think Attorney Talver is right, that some of our own people get caught up in the illusion that they lose an understanding of what they're supposed to do if they get these positions. You know, and that's why I made reference to the sheriff in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Unfortunately, he's not the norm. He's an exception to the case. But there are some cases where we get in and we do the right thing. But we need more brothers and sisters in the system who will have the courage to do the right thing and treat everybody fairly and not be caught up in white supremacy.
Well, you heard it from the boss. Absolutely. And as we close, the NMPA's Midwinter Training Conference kicks off on January 19th. We'll be at the Diplomat Beach Resort in Hollywood, Florida through the 22nd of January, where the theme is the publishing industry, advancing the Black press of America, reaffirming, engaging, and empowering. You are welcome to join us. Visit www.nnpa-events.com to register and reserve your hotel rooms. That's NNPA events, nnpa-events.com. Today, we lift up the Black and Missing Foundation. They put out an urgent call to help find Shakira Cotton, a 15-year-old who went missing at about 10:30 p.m. on November 16th from her residence in Knoxville, Tennessee. Information provided by the Black and Missing Foundation shows that when Shakira's mother went to wake her up for school at 5:30 a.m., she discovered that Shakira was not at home and the back door was unlocked. Shakira is 5 feet 4 inches tall. She weighs about 195 pounds. She has black shoulder-length hair and brown eyes. Anyone with information is asked to please call the Knox County Sheriff's Department at 865-215-2243 or the Black and Missing Foundation at 877-972-2634. Please, let's help bring Shakira home safely. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.